Hey everyone, welcome back to another edition of the Pick Six. I'm your host, Mike Wobschall, inside the indoor practice field at TCO Performance Center. The regular season is upon us, finally. Let's get to work and answer some of your questions. Question number one comes from Aaron in LA. How do you think the Vikings decided to keep Coley and Zylstra behind the top three wide receivers instead of others, such as Kendall Wright or Chad Beebe? Well, I'm sure it was a tough decision because the Vikings had some pretty good competition at the wide receiver position this spring and this summer. A lot of good players running around catching passes. The Vikings kept two good ones in Stacy, Coley, a draft pick from a couple years ago, and Brandon Zylstra, who comes to the team from the CFL. Head coach Mike Zimmer spoke earlier in the week and said it was Zylstra's work early on in the offseason program and OTAs that really stood out and helped him earn a roster spot at the end of the summer. The Vikings have some pretty solid depth at wide receiver. Question number two comes from Chris. Why did we keep 5 running backs? Well, head coach Mike Zimmer was asked about this earlier in the week as well, and he said it was all about keeping good players. They think both Rock Thomas and Mike Boone can be good players in 2018. When you start trying to split hairs, sometimes you get rid of good players, you're cutting your nose to spite your face. I like what the Vikings did by keeping both of these guys. They both look good in the preseason, and they can both help the Vikings this season. Ryan in Nashville has the next question. Are you comfortable with the backup quarterback situation? Yeah, I am, and here's what I like about it. The Vikings have 2 different types of quarterbacks behind starter Kirk Cousins. In Kyle Sloter, you have a young, developing quarterback. You have your project, a guy with a high ceiling, a guy who you still don't totally know what he can be yet, but you like what you've seen so far. And in Trevor Siemian, you have a reliable veteran with 25 starts of experience under his belt. If you need to get out of a game or you need to get through a few games while your starter is recovering from an injury, Siemian can do that for you. The Vikings have a good situation brewing behind Kirk Cousins. The next question comes from Mike. Comments on the O-line depth issue. The team seems to have had the O-line in a good place last year, and now it's changed. Your thoughts? Well, I think later on in training camp in the preseason, the Vikings started to get something going with the offensive line. Head coach Mike Zimmer called Danny Isadora a natural at center, even though he had never played it. And he said he was impressed with Brett Jones being able to join the team and one day later playing a game. So it looks like Jones and Isadora are going to give the Vikings a boost in the middle of the offensive line. Pat Elflein has returned to practice, so that is really good news. And look at offensive tackle for the Vikings. They have 2 solid starters, and Riley Reif, who was really good last year, and Rashad Hill, plus second-round pick Brian O'Neill, and in a pinch, Mike Remmers can slide out and play tackle as well. So I do like the Vikings' depth when it comes to the offensive line, and even though this has been a much maligned group for much of the offseason, I think they've got something going, and they're going to be solid for the Vikings now that we're in the regular season. The next question comes from Kyle. Have to say, although I understand fully, I'm disappointed to see Brian Robison go. Yeah, I think that's how all of us feel. Brian was a really good player for a really long time, and he had an awesome Vikings.com segment called 96 Questions that everyone really loved. So it is tough to see B-Rob go. The silver lining is this means the Vikings have a lot of young, good players at defensive end. The bad news is we're going to miss our buddy Brian Robison, but he'll always be a member of the Vikings family, and we'll see him again soon, I'm sure. Our final question comes from Bill. With Brian Robison's release and Terence Newman's retirement, is there anyone still on the roster older than you? No one left on the roster older than me, so thanks for that, Bill. I will say though, Andrew Sendejo, Everson Griffin, and Marcus Sherrills are all turning 31 this year, so they're catching up to me. That's it for this week's edition of the Pick Six. We'll be back next week with another edition, so please submit your questions into the email address at the bottom of the screen. We're also going to be back later this week with a Pick Six that is focused on the San Francisco 49ers. So if you have a question about Sunday's game, send it in, and maybe we'll see you later this week. In the meantime, stay tuned to Vikings.com for coverage of your favorite team in the build-up to the Week 1 game against the San Francisco 49ers. If you haven't downloaded the Vikings app, you should do that right now. The regular season is underway, and we're going to have tons of great content, and all of it will be delivered to that Vikings app. So make sure you go download it right now. See you later.